So welcome everybody. My name's Sally McAdams. I coordinate Climate Emergency Australia, and we're hosting this webinar today on Noosa's climate emergency response. And we're going to have Cheyenne Barmond and Sion Zivets presenting for us. And we also have Heather and Joanna present for specialist questions as well, but I'll let the Noosa team introduce themselves more fully in a moment. Before we get underway, I'd like to acknowledge country, and I'm joining today from Wurundjeri Woiwurrung land in Melbourne, Naarm, and they're the traditional owners of the lands that I live and work on. And I'd like to acknowledge as well that everywhere on this continent we're all joining from unceded Aboriginal land, and I'd like to thank and acknowledge the elders of all First Nations who've been looking after this country since the Dreamtime. As I mentioned before, we will be recording, so if you don't want to appear in the recording, please turn your cameras off. If you don't mind, we'd love to keep seeing your faces, and do keep yourselves on mute so we can keep the background noise down. If you haven't come across Climate Emergency Australia before, we're a network of Australian councils that have declared a climate emergency. You can see my contacts in the chat if you need to get in touch, and I'll tell you a little bit more about how to stay connected with us later on. But without too much further ado, I'd like to hand over to the Noosa team, and I think, Sion, you're going to share, am I right? I'll stop sharing. Great, that looks good. And I will just say that if you'd like to ask questions as we go, perhaps put them in the chat. We will have a short break in the middle just to collect a few of those, and then we'll have a longer Q&A session at the end. But yeah, if you've got a burning question that you want to make sure you don't forget, then feel free to put it in the chat. Over to you, Sion and Cheyenne.
Thanks so much, Sally. We might just do a quick intro. Joe, if you wanted to get started with an intro.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Jo Pardo, the Climate Adaptation Program Lead here at Noosa. I sit in the Climate and Sustainability team.
Thanks, Joe. Heather?
Yeah, thanks, Jay. So I'm Heather Fellow-Smith. I lead the climate mitigation here at Council with the team.
I'm Sion Zivets. I'm a Sustainability and Climate Change Officer. I lead our sustainability program.
Thanks, Sion. And hi, everyone. My name's Cheyenne, and I help to coordinate the Sustainability, Climate Change and First Nations program at Council. Thank you so much for the opportunity and for everyone's time. We really do appreciate it. We too would like to acknowledge and pay our deepest respects to the traditional custodians of the land on which we're joining from, the Kabi Kabi peoples. We pay respect to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and thank them for their long and continued custodianship of this beautiful place, which we now enjoy. We'll talk a bit about our relationship with Kabi later on in the presentation, but this is a beautiful artwork that was done by a local Kabi Kabi woman, Shauna Hill, for Council, telling the story of Noosa. So, yeah. And we extend that respect to all First Nations joining this call today. So we're going to do a quick high-level overview of our climate change response and how climate change is affecting us here in Noosa. We're going to whip through, there's quite a lot of slides, but we're going to try and whip through it. But we do want it to be dynamic. So if you have a burning question, please, yeah, feel free to put your hand up and we might try and do it throughout so we're not just talking at you. We'll go through our response and the role of partnerships, us being a smaller council, some of the key challenges that we're currently facing, and then we'll do a Q&A. So Sion and I will just co-present and make it dynamic. Thank you. Okay, so quick background, in case you aren't familiar with where Noosa is, we're in southeast Queensland. We're just north of Brisbane and the Sunshine Coast, but we are in the southeast Queensland region, and we're a smaller council relatively, and we sit on the coastline, and so we have about 11 coastal towns and a number of hinterland towns, and significant national park area as well, which we'll talk about later. But we have a big river system that goes through on the coastline there that passes through 3 major lakes, which really helps with our flood risk reduction, actually, which we can talk about later. But yeah, that's us in Noosa.
That's you.
So, yeah, thanks. Yeah, just a really quick history of Noosa. I think we won't read through each of these significant milestones in our history, but I think the key points are Kabi Kabi have been here for at least 20,000 years, taking care of this beautiful place, living along the coastline, but also enjoying the rainforest in the hinterland and in the mountains before dispossession. Noosa's more modern history is one of community advocacy and lobbying, and very much being active with local, state, and federal governments to protect Noosa and the natural environment that people came to Noosa for. So we have a history of people rising up to defend Noosa against, sand mining and major development on our dunes. And then that filtered in through to Noosa Council, basically adopting very strong planning controls, limiting building heights to 4 stories, us being recognized as the first UNESCO Biosphere Reserve in Queensland in 2007, and working closely with Kabi Kabi as well for their native title claim, which goes back decades, but the most recent one was 10 years ago. We fought for de-amalgamation when the state forced us to amalgamate with other councils in the area, just recognizing that we had a different approach to development. So it was very much community-led and council-backed at the time. We set a very strong net zero target about 10 years ago. We're a World Surfing Reserve, and we also have significant area national park. And that really underpins, if you go to the next slide, please, Sion, that really underpins our ethos at Noosa Council, which is different by nature. So we have that legacy of environmental stewardship dating back to the 60s. Our planning frameworks have defended that legacy, and we try to be innovative in the actions and decisions that we take. Protecting the natural environment and elements of the natural environment are scored as the strongest contributors to livability every time we do community livability surveys. And thanks to that history of community activism, we have over nearly 45% of our LGA protected for conservation, and over 70% of our shire being vegetated. And now with Sunshine Coast Council, our southern neighbours, being recognised as a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve, we're the only place in Australia with 3 biosphere reserves sitting side by side. So quite an opportunity there to leverage. And we also recently got certified as a EarthCheck Silver Sustainable Destination, which was a big achievement for us because destination management is one of our most significant challenges, which we'll speak to a little bit later. Thank you. So climate change is not new to us. We have been affected already, and we're seeing the impacts grow. In the 2019-2020 back summer bushfires, we did get a significant portion of our LGA, as you can see on this map, burned. And down at the bottom of our shire, where Perigian Beach is, we had quite a significant, severe bushfire right next to urban community. And so that was quite a wake-up call for us. Now, we have dealt with floods and other disasters in the past, but the scale and magnitude has changed significantly over what we've seen in the past. So this also, prompted quite a lot of funding from the state and the feds in response to the 2019 bushfires, and we had created a significant program called Fire Tech Connect at our digital hub, which has been looking at innovations in warning, early warning, and response. Thanks, Jan. The 2022 flood events, which affected much of South Queensland and northern New South Wales was quite significant for our shire. This is one of our most flood affected communities. Quite a lot of water coming above their floor levels, moving quite rapidly. And that event was greater than a 1% AEP, a 1 in 100 year event for that area specifically. And it likewise has triggered quite a lot of funding and response measures from our end to build resilience, to update our flood models, to reduce the risks, to undertake detailed planning studies in these areas. Thanks. We dodged quite a bullet with the tropical cyclone Alfred, which many of you might have heard about. It came down the coast and affected southeast Queensland quite significantly. Now, this video is from 2019, Tropical Cyclone Oma, which didn't cross the coast, but still led to significant swell events. Now, that's Noosa Main Beach, our most popular tourist area, which many of you might have heard about or visited. We lost 10,000 cubic meters of sand in that event in 2019. And by comparison, from Tropical Cyclone Alfred, we lost 30,000 cubic meters, so triple the amount of sand. We're very lucky that we had a lot of sand already built up on Noosa Main Beach before that event. Otherwise, we would have seen very significant impacts. So, yeah, it's cyclone response is also another one now that's on our cards. But I guess the point being that these events are happening in quite short frequency now. Like every couple of years, we're having a major disaster event that requires us to stand up, activate our LDCC, which is our local disaster coordination center. And that's not really new for Queensland in a sense. We are the most disaster prone state by far. So this is our disaster losses by state by the Climate Council. And we have, if you go to the next slide, Sion, we have the first state agency, the Queensland Reconstruction Authority, that was created in response to major disasters, flood events in 2011 in Queensland. And since 2011, the Queensland Reconstruction Authority has basically reconstructed almost every road in Queensland over the last 10 years. And so, we're not inexperienced when it comes to extreme weather, but the frequency of these events happening more often and the magnitude is definitely being felt and recognized here. Thanks, Jan. So some of the major hazards that we face, because we're subtropical climate, higher temperatures, we're already seeing more heat waves, more significant heat waves and for longer, massive variability in our rainfall. We've already seen a decrease in our average rainfall. So we are likely to see more drought and drying over time. But when it does rain, it pours. And so we're seeing those more intense, shorter duration rainfall events. The other big one for us is the rising sea levels. So we are one of the regions that does have sea level, which is roughly in line with what's happening at the global scale, the increases. And so with most over 60% of our population on the coastline, it's a big one for us and on southern neighbors, Sunshine Coast.
All right, I'll cover this section. Thanks, Shan, for running us through that. So our response to all of the climate scenarios that we're facing now and looking into the future, I'll just run through that. So we were the first local government in Queensland to declare a climate emergency. That was in 2019. We're also a founding member of the Cities Power Partnership, which is a national initiative for local councils to pledge action around climate. Previous to that, though, council was ambitious to set a net zero emissions target by 2026. And we'll give you a bit of an update on where that's at the moment in a moment. But our program, as you would have heard through our introduction, has key focus on both mitigation and adaptation, as well as looking at sustainability from a holistic perspective and working closely with our First Nations partners. We also run a climate change grants program. We have a climate change program steering group internally within council to help us to guide our responses and our project. We have a community reference group, which is made up of community organization representatives and community members, and a regional youth climate change group. All of these feed into our response and actions. Following on from the declaration of the climate emergency, Noosa Council developed a climate change response plan, which was endorsed in 2021. That's a 5-year plan, which we're still progressing on, and it covers 8 themes. So, which is quite holistic from our perspective, and so we work on a lot of the actions within this plan from our team, but we have to work across council to deliver on this and see the response to climate as a transport issue, as an environmental issue, including agriculture, and working with our waste team and economic development to deliver actions on zero waste and circular economy, for example. But that's not the only piece of policy that guides our response, and we've made sure to embed climate response within various other policies and plans, including our corporate plan, corporate risk management framework. Our waste plan also references emissions reduction because waste, the landfill that we own and operate, is our highest source of emissions for our council. In our environment strategy, talks a lot about climate change, and there's actions there, and our smart biosphere plan, which is our economic development plan, which also covers. We have a pretty committed community in this space. A high percentage of our community, understands that climate change is happening now and prioritizes action in this space, and that gives us a good amount of impetus to continue to invest and work in this space. So that's a really positive aspect for us.
Our corporate climate risk framework, which we have developed with Sunshine Coast Council, our southern neighbours, follows really the IPCC climate risk framework on, getting mitigation to address reduction of the hazards and adaptation to look at exposure and vulnerability. We recognize that there are impacts to our ability to deliver all our services and deliver on our corporate plan, and the 5 themes within that corporate plan. So climate change undermines all of it, and unless we have an adequate response. Yep. So with this one, so this is our climate mitigation journey so far, which actually goes back quite a while. We discovered to 2001, which is interesting. We joined the Cities for Climate Protection. I actually don't know much about that program, but we did have a 20% reduction target in 2002 by 2010. Don't know how we went with that. I don't think we met it. We weren't monitoring annual emissions at that stage, but the real big milestone was in 2016, where we set a very ambitious 2026 net zero target. And we started measuring our carbon footprint and actually allocating budget to reduce our emissions. And then 2019, as we mentioned, we declared a climate emergency, which also helped. Look, we are not going to meet that 2026 net zero target. We have reduced by 20%, which is quite good. But our waste emissions are still significant. Same with our scope 3. We do account for our community waste that reaches our landfill because we own and operate our landfill. And so what we're currently doing, Heather is leading the climate mitigation program, is updating our net zero target and putting a climate positive investment plan in place. So we're really trying to back some still ambitious net zero targets with a commitment to invest in some of the really big actions. Like we've sort of ticked off all the low-hanging fruit boxes. We've installed heaps of solar and batteries all over our buildings, but we're working on the big stuff now, the big ticket items, and we're going to be aiming for carbon negative eventually. So that's climate mitigation. With climate adaptation, it's probably a bit younger. In 2018, I think it was, or 16, we got grant funding from the state. It was called the QCOAST program, the Queensland Coastal Resilience by 2100 program. And all the coastal councils in Queensland were offered money to develop coastal hazard adaptation strategies. And it took us quite a bit of time to develop that, but that was sort of our first-hand concerted effort in adaptation, let's say. And that was endorsed, as well as the climate change response plan, in 2021. So now we had these plans that were endorsed by council that really kicked off the adaptation program in full. We have been focusing on coastal projects since then, and then the 2022 flood events occurred. So we got, our refocus a lot on flood resilience. We partnered with Sunshine Coast Council, we'll speak to a bit later, on doing a more regional resilience project. And then in 2024, we started ramping up our partnership with First Nations, which is good. And then in 2025, we've seen Tropical Cyclone Alfred, so there's quite a lot of responses to that we're also working on. We also had very significant landslides occur during the 2022 flood event. So it wasn't just the flooding, but on some of our public roads, on some of our higher terrains, we got very significant public roads slipping, and that has required about 3 times the amount of annual budget that we run at council in response to actually repair those roads. So that's taken heaps of time and resources over the past 4 years, for 3 years for us to respond to that. In terms of sort of the direction of adaptation and resilience building at council, we have adaptation principles, which we co-develop with community. They're available publicly on our website, and they do strongly prioritize nature-based solutions because of our legacy here at Noosa. We use a dynamic adaptive policy pathways approach, which many of you might know of from the IPCC and others, but that has been really, really handy to deal with the uncertainty and get communities on board. We have been focusing on community-based adaptation through some of the groups we run, which we have put on hold due to capacity. One of 2 of these, the community reference group and the regional youth climate change group. So over the past year, we haven't been able to service it due to capacity, just because we have so many other projects that we're leading right now, but it is something that we will look to reignite next year. Thanks.
Thank you. So the sustainability program comes under my role, and we try to take a holistic perspective on sustainability. Traditional paradigm of sustainable development has asked us to kind of balance the social, economic, and environmental outcomes of decisions that we make. But a new paradigm has emerged, which is probably a better representation of where we need to be in this space, and recognizes that Earth's life support system, our environment, if our environment's not healthy, it's not providing a safe space for humanity to operate. Not indicating that economy is less important than society, but economy is embedded within social systems and structures. But again, noting that without a healthy environment, we're really not going to be able to do much into the future. And I was really encouraged to find that this principle is embedded within our planning scheme, which suggests that development is required to fit within the natural carrying capacity of our landscape. And that's really resulted in what Shan was speaking to before, in terms of the amount of land that's under conservation and protection status, almost 45% at this point, and a real emphasis on kind of constraining development to ensure that we don't overshoot our LGA's ability to to function well in this space. So what we've been doing is looking at frameworks to try to operationalize and embed this deeper within our within council operations and policies. So we've been considering how the framework of donut economics and aligned with the Sustainable Development Goals can help us to achieve that. And that's really the ambition, really, is to operationalize sustainability principles that sit within our corporate plan. And the idea is that these principles are kind of overarching and that sit to support our policy framework. The challenge as an organization, I would imagine many of us face this, is how we take this and put it into practice. So I've been leading an embedding program, and we've convened a sustainability working group, and we're working closely with our procurement team at the moment to advance sustainable procurement practices. So things like that, and through education and awareness raising, really help us to achieve operationalization of these principles. I think Sharon mentioned at the beginning as well that we are a small organization, we're a small council and a small LGA. Partnerships are hugely important to us to achieve the goals and ambitions that we set forward, in particular in the climate change space and achieving community emissions reduction. We partner very closely with this organization, Zero Emissions Noosa, which does a lot of the outward-facing, community-facing work around helping community to transition. So we fund them through a 3-year partnership agreement, which helps them to cover administrative and operational costs, as well as some budget for projects. They're also eligible to apply to our community climate change grants program, which they do, and have achieved some really significant projects through that. They run community education forums at our libraries, which talk about electrification and home batteries and solar. One of their biggest events, which I'll talk about in a moment, is EV and Electrify Everything Expo. They do a lot of advocacy at the state and federal level as well for policy that supports emissions reduction activities. They've done a huge amount of projects with strata and businesses across the Shire to help them transition. And we really lean on Zero Emissions Noosa to carry out a lot of work that internally we don't have capacity to deliver because we're a small team. I did mention this program, the EV and Electrify Everything Expo, which has been running for 7 years now. It was one of the first electric vehicle expos in the country. And this year they had the largest collection of electric vehicles in any expo in Queensland. So this is a huge achievement in terms of community education for Zero Emissions Noosa, and Noosa Council is really happy and pleased to be a supporter of them.
So, as I mentioned before, we do have a very strong and growing relationship with the traditional custodians of the Noosa region, the Kabi Kabi peoples. If you just go to the next slide, please, Leon. We do have a history of working closely with Kabi Kabi as they began to organize politically a couple decades ago, and have partnered with them on some major projects, including the oyster reef restoration project in the Noosa River. Our arts and culture program has a very close relationship, and the Ural Ringtail State Forest Conservation Project, which I'll mention in a second. Council has always stood as a strong supporter of Kabi rights during their native title claim. And that partnership has really grown recently due to a strong foundation of trust that we're committed to do right by Kabi, support them in managing and improving cultural heritage, in ensuring that we are also custodians of the lands and waters of Noosa and paying tribute to the legacy that they have held for tens of thousands of years. More recently, we have strengthened the partnership with over 90 formal engagements, both with the Kabi Kabi People's Aboriginal Corporation, who is the native title body and cultural heritage body for the Kabi Kabi peoples, but also with their New Land and Sea Rangers program. Last year was quite a significant milestone for the Kabi Kabi peoples. They got consent determination through the federal courts for their native title, which expands over a huge area. And this is just one of 3 parts that they have a claim to. And it goes from North Brisbane, as you can see. It's kind of hard to see on that map, but there's the islands there in Moreton Bay. This goes from pretty much North Brisbane, North Quilter, which is south of us, and all the way up to Childers. And Noosa LG is just one small portion of that. So they span about 7 local government areas. But yeah, thanks, Jan. Next one. And then in September last year, we also reached quite a significant historic milestone. We co-developed the Kabi Kabi commitment with the Kabi Kabi People's Aboriginal Corporation. These are the signatures of all their directors, their board of directors, as well as our councillors. It's quite a beautiful piece of work, this commitment. It's publicly available. You can read it online, but it's really just, it's an invitation from Kabi Kabi to residents, visitors, businesses to open our hearts and minds and become custodians of our collective home, recognizing that the key to custodianship is having the humility and respect to care for and protect that which sustains us in return, which in this case is the natural systems that underpin our well-being. And to also take into consideration intergenerational well-being. So the signing of the commitment demonstrated our respect for Kabi Kabi and our enduring commitment to care for the lands, waters, and peoples of Noosa, and it enhances, our culture of different by nature and our legacy of long-term sustainability. So right now we're working on implementation of the commitment. What does that look like in practice, as well as a relationship agreement? If you go to the next slide, Sam. Thank you. A relationship agreement outlining our collaboration priorities, engagement protocol, how we advocate together, how we partner on natural resource management, and improve the way we manage and protect cultural heritage. Very significantly, we have an incredibly strong relationship with our southern neighbours, Sunshine Coast Council, who may be on the call today, but we work nearly weekly with them on multiple projects. But it sort of started, it kicked off our climate teams and sustainability teams collaborating quite strongly with 2021, I think it was. We got a state government grant to become the first one of 2 pilot regions to test the Queensland state government's new climate risk management framework for local governments. And we created this regional climate action roadmap out of that partnership. It was a 1-year project where we did a first pass risk assessment, looking at our regional climate risk, recognizing that climate change doesn't care for LGA borders, and that there's significant strength in us partnering together. And that had 3 strategic priorities in that document, which is also publicly available. There's a website. Building climate-ready councils, so recognizing that we first need to really get our own houses in order to be able to continue to provide important services to community, not just in acute events, but also in those slow burn, gradual, chronic events and chronic changes. Empower our community to also become climate ready and be able to build resilience, and then also advocate to higher levels of government and through great associations like CEA, to raise our collective voice and get more funding. And so we actually, if you go to the next slide, Sam, we did quite well in that. And with that project, we also developed a climate hazard timeline of the major events that have occurred in Sunshine Coast and Noosa historically, and then worked with Ella Reeks from Climate in Mind and Kevin Hennessy, who's ex-CSIRO and IPCC lead author, to look at plausible future events and show that the frequency of these events is becoming much higher. And so the gap between events that we need to be able to recover to BAU or to higher than BAU to build resilience is shrinking, and it's incredibly difficult to build that resilience when you have very short time to recover after these events. So this was a powerful tool we used in experiential risk workshops with internal stakeholders across both councils and external stakeholders. Thanks, Jan. That's just showing, yeah. And so 2 years ago, we got a significant amount of state funding from the Queensland Reconstruction Authority to undertake a study on how risks cascade and compound when critical infrastructure fails. And this was an inward-focused project. So we were looking at what happens when there's a major climate event that it knocks out infrastructure, multiple infrastructures, and then how does that affect our ability as councils to deliver our services, and then what's that downstream impact on community. So I won't go into the details here, but it was very complex, looking at the different dimensions, and we work with all of our regional critical infrastructure providers and critical service providers from emergency services to unpack plausible outage events. And it's suffice it to say that we're already seeing, and they projecting with these increased hazard events, that we'll see a much longer periods of disruption. And because there's so much interconnectivity between critical infrastructures now, you won't see just one go out, you'll see multiple go out. So we need to plan for that better. And so that project finished up just a few months ago. Thanks. Yeah, next one. Another very significant project is the Ural and Ringtail State Forest Conservation Project. So in 2018, our most significant, or our largest community volunteer environmental group in Noosa, the Noosa Parks Association, brought a project to us to partner with the state government and Kabi Kabi to purchase the leases, the harvesting lease from HQ Plantations for one of the state forests, two of the state forests in Noosa. So it's converting basically 2,400 hectares in our hinterland to protected areas. And now they've been transitioned into national park, which is amazing. And so Kabi Kabi have been a key part of that, with an Indigenous land use agreement in place and a carbon offset created with cultural and social co-benefits. Sorry, just getting a bit of feedback. But we can keep moving. Sion. And there is a video online on Greenfleet's website, who is the carbon project developer, that you guys can see if you want more information on that. The other significant partnership is with a bunch of universities. We work primarily in the adaptation and resilience space around urban greening, heat risk reduction, coastal resilience, and flood risk reduction. So we have big projects with them and rely on them, for example, University of Sunshine Coast, a lot for our coastal monitoring at the regional scale, which we also partner with Sunshine Coast Council on. But we wouldn't be able to monitor the changes we're already seeing on our coastline without their support. So recognizing that these university partnerships have made a significant difference in our capacity to be able to respond.
So we've got quite a young regional organization, which we call SEQCRA, the Southeast Queensland Climate Resilient Alliance, which is made up of 8 members, and Noosa Council is one of the founding members of this alliance. And we've already found a lot of benefit from working across the region on climate resilience, and it's a wonderful space for us as officers to get together and share the work that we're doing across the region. And we've got a couple of collaborative regional projects in the works. So we're really pleased and excited to work in this way. And it is a young alliance, and we will be putting more out there and working more on this in the years to come, for sure.
That's us. And we have a good vision of where we want to be, but we have a long way to go, we think. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. That was really, really great. Such a broad range of things that you're working on and such an interesting mix of things. I will delve into the chat in just a moment. But while people are thinking about their questions and putting them in the chat or raising their hands if they'd like to, selfishly, I've got a question for you. I'd like to hear a little bit more about the Cubby Cubby commitment. It seems like an amazing way of communicating to your community, to visitors, maybe even to, internally within council about kind of the priority of looking after country. And I'm just curious, has that helped you to accelerate kind of internal mobilisation, that embedding process that you talked about? Has it helped accelerate community engagement? Have you noticed anything since then?
Yeah, not as much, I think, in terms of community engagement. We did get a lot of community support, and then also questions on, there was a resounding no to the voice referendum. Why would we support this? And so, but definitely in terms of our commitment to partner with Cubby Cubby on custodianship, on collaborative projects around blue carbon, terrestrial carbon, river management, coastal management. There's been a lot of momentum in that space recently, getting our own house in order with the Cultural Heritage Act and Native Title Act and trying to demonstrate best practice. That's all also had a significant change, which is great and very much needed. So that's been really good. And joint advocacy. Cubby Cubby have a very strong and powerful voice, and they see sustainable development as essential and part of their culture. They've been doing it for tens of thousands of years, and so protecting biodiversity, enhancing the natural systems upon which we rely, those are things that we also share and can jointly advocate for to other levels of government. So, yeah.
Yeah, awesome. That's a great one that I hadn't thought of. Fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I want to hear some questions from people in the chat, or please feel free to just put your hand up or even take yourself off mute and sing out. Don't be shy. Otherwise, I get to ask all my questions.
Hi, I'm Emma Peterson. I just recently joined Maryback Council in Victoria. Thank you. That was a really interesting presentation and sort of discussion. I am quite new to this local council space, so I've got a couple of questions. One, I guess I'm curious, you mentioned your sort of resources and how that looks in terms of implementation of your plan. So firstly, how big is your team and sort of how is that structured? And then secondly, do you have any tips and tricks on how to work with those other levels of government, the state and federal governments, to sort of maximise, the joint outcome that you can deliver with them as well?
Good question. So team, there are 3 permanent roles in Noosa Council. The adaptation role that Joe sits in, the mitigation role that Heather sits in, and then this new coordinator role that I sit in, which was previously a principal strategic planner. So we sit in the strategic planning branch, which is called sustainability and strategy, which is a new title, in the strategy and environment department. It's good that we sit with the strategic land use planners because we have very strong influence on the planning scheme, but we also are in charge of all hazard and risk identification and planning scheme amendments and things. So it's quite a lot. Definitely, mostly in the adaptation space, is quite a lot, but these are whole of council and whole of community changes that we're trying to make, right, with mitigation and holistic sustainability, First Nations engagement, and adaptation. So it's a significant challenge and growing challenge. We also have Sion's role as the sustainability lead, and although that's a temporary position that we want to make permanent. That's our team. So there's the 4 of us. And we have been asking for more resources, particularly in the First Nations space, a dedicated council officer for First Nations engagement and partnership, and then coastal and flooding as well, because those areas are our two most significant and expensive hazards. And there's so much work to be done to plan for those hazards in Noosa. In terms of advocacy to the state and feds, look, we have a very vocal community. So we rely on those partnerships as well to raise our collective voice. That's been really powerful. Our mayor and councillors are not afraid to advocate through LGAQ and through other forums for more resources, for more support, for what we need. And leveraging our partnership with Sunshine Coast Council has also been really powerful, because the two of our councils together make up a significant, portion of Southeast Queensland, and the Sunshine Coast Council carries a very powerful voice. They're a much bigger council, and so if we join up on messaging, it makes a big difference. If that helps.
Thank you.
Great. I'm going to come to Nat in a moment, but I've got a couple of questions in the chat as well. And I think I just had better check with you guys right now. Do you have time for a little bit of overtime question time? Because I can see that we're going to run out of time.
I don't mind staying on for extra minutes.
Yeah, well, let's go to Nat because she's had her hand up for a little while. Nat, what's your question?
Hello, thank you. Great to hear all the amazing work you guys are doing. I'm curious about community resilience. You mapped out the, we're nearly at these tipping points, the frequency of events. So I'm curious about how you focus your sort of adaptive and resilience programs in that context.
Good question, Natalie. That's one of the areas which us and Sunny Coast Council have identified in this most recent project as quite a big gap. Because we're in Queensland, the most disaster prone state, we actually have really strong disaster management engagement with community. We have a full-time disaster resilience engagement officer who basically goes out and does what's called the Get Ready program. So ahead of disaster season, summer season, we're working with the state, all the emergency service agencies, and we're pushing out comms, we're pushing out emergency packs and these things. But the climate element hasn't come out really strong there yet, right? And so I'd say it's one of the areas that we're not as strong in yet, but we have, recognized it in our regional climate action roadmap with Sunny Coast Council. We're working on being, I think, maybe the two first councils, maybe not, to adopt the adaptation game and try and roll that out to community next year with Sunny Coast. And so, and we have what's called the Climate Wise Communities program, which was built by Ku-ring-gai Council. We have a 3D simulation table, and we're planning to run resilience building workshops with community next year. We've also been seeing some of the great work that the Victorian and New South Wales councils have been doing in providing grants to households for resilience retrofitting and environmental upgrades. We can't with state legislation do EUAs here, but we strongly believe that if we get another grant program going, because our current community grants program only goes to community groups, we would want to target that for households to build resilience and to be able to build on energy efficiency and solar and batteries and measures that have both adaptation and mitigation co-benefits. And so that's an area that we'd love to explore and try and push for next year. But yeah.
Good one. I think we've pretty much answered Debbie's question, so I'm going to go to Nick's question. This might need to be the last one. So Nick asked, in regard to the plantation land that Council and the Parks Association have managed to purchase and get converted to a national park, where did the funding come from? What was the biodiversity significance of that area of land? And was it opportunistic, or was it like a strategic choice of land?
Good question. Thanks, Nick. Yeah, sorry I had to fly through that one. It is such a significant project. It was about 60 years in the making. It's been thought up by Noosa Parks Association. They started in the early 1960s, and they had always recognized that there was a missing link between just on the north shore of Noosa River is the Kalula National Park. It's this huge expanse of national park area. It's beautiful. And that's where the Noosa Everglades are. There's very significant pattern fen systems there. And they always thought there was a alignment between what we had in the north and down south and the west. And so this area of land, this 2,400 hectares, is that critical missing link. And so it was really, they had known that they had always had an eye on the Ural and Ringtail State Forest. And they had been pushing slowly. First, they got the Tewantin National Park, which is just here where council offices are, just north of us. They had that first converted into national park in the early 2000s. And then once we got Ural and Ringtail converted, they got incorporated into the Tewantin National Park. So it's now 9,008 hectares, I think it is. So it's huge. 9,000 hectares, 1,000 times the size of Queensland Suncorp Stadium. And so the funding for it, Noosa Parks Association put in $1 million. We put $1 million, and some from our environment levy, and the state put $1 million in. So together that $3 million was enough. 3.5 million purchase was enough to purchase the plantation rights from HQ Plantations. And so we restored around 900 hectares of that. How much did we restore? 900 hectares of that. And then, and that was done with Green Fleet and Noosa Land Care, which is a local NRM group, as well as Cubby Cubby.
And Cheyenne, I just missed a little bit at the end of the question there from Nick. How does that tie in with your nature-based solutions approach?
Look, it's and also the significance of biodiversity. So it's critical koala habitat and greater glider, which are both threatened species here. So it's a significant part of our conservation estate. Building connectivity for biodiversity is one of the most, and refugia are two of the most important actions that we can do from an adaptation perspective for biodiversity. So climate ready conservation is also quite high on our radar right now. And so being able to have co-benefits for both nature and climate, generating carbon offsets as well, has been really, really important. And we're looking for the next Ural and Ringtail State Forest project to help with our carbon negative ambition that we're hoping to set next year.
Yeah, fantastic.
Thanks, Cheyenne. Sounds like you guys are doing some fantastic work. Keep it up.
Oh, thanks, man. I can't claim much for this. This is all previous people.
Wonderful. Okay. I think we will need to start wrapping up. So thank you, Cheyenne and Sion in particular, but also Heather and Joanna for being here. It's been really fantastic to hear all of that. And thank you for sharing so generously and openly about not just the successes, but the challenges as well. Just a couple of little things to wrap up. If you're on the call and you are maybe visiting us for the first time, you may not know that we have a base camp. I think, Cheyenne, you mentioned something about this earlier, that, sharing this kind of information amongst officers is really powerful. And our base camp has a huge number of officers on there sharing this kind of information, perhaps not in this depth all the time, but that's a really great place to join if you're not on there. And you can just simply email me if you'd like to know more about that or join that. You can also connect with us through our website, or you can contact me directly. And I wanted to give a little quick plug as well to our last webinar of the year coming up. We've talked a little bit today about the perennial issue of funding and resourcing, and we're lucky enough to have a couple of really innovative projects to talk about coming up on the 13th of November. And we've got Greater Bendigo talking about their climate collaboration, which is a really interesting kind of grassroots, community, local, place-based kind of a alternative funding model. And then complete other end of the spectrum, we've got Auckland Council talking about their green bonds program, which has brought in billions of dollars of investment from overseas into their sustainability projects. So make sure to tune into that one. If you haven't already registered, that's where you can find that. Also, we will have one more climate cafe for the year. So if you're feeling some feelings about all of the climate things, please feel free to sign up to that one as well. And with that, just once again, a really big thank you to the Noosa team for being here today and for sharing all of that. Thank you, all of you, for being here, and we look forward to seeing you at the next one.
Thanks so much,
Thanks.
Sally, and thanks everyone for joining.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity, everyone. Thanks, Sally.
Thanks so
Thanks
much.
so much.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.